I'm so looking forward to our conversation. And I want to I'm going to hold on my slide for a minute. Raise your virtual or actual hand if you can see the kitten moving. It's a video, so look carefully. You can, if you look at the ear, you can probably see it moving. So the miracle of technology there. So I am so excited to talk to you about the science of sleep. And so I will tell you at the start, this is one of the classes that I do for my intro to psychology students at Amherst. And I will say, this is the lecture that I can never get through in my 80-minute class. And don't worry, I'm not going to go 80 minutes. But the reason is the students have so many questions. So I start talking and there's just like, oh wait, well, how about my roommate? Well, how about this? And whatever. And so I know this is a topic. I was listening to you all have some dialogue before I jumped on, that this is one that's really interesting. So I'm going to give you a really broad sort of overview of the science of sleep and dreams. But as always, I know that you all are a smart and interactive group, so I've saved lots of time for us to do Q&A at the end. But I'm going to start, as I always do, with a poll question. So I'm going to start by asking you a very simple question. Do you get enough sleep? And let's see. For some reason, I'm not able to, there we go. Okay.
I see it now.
But I think it ended. You can't answer it now, can you?
I see it on my end.
It says poll ended though.
Yeah, it says poll
Oh,
ended.
now
So,
it's,
wait, so I'm trying to launch it. Is it launched now?
Let's try it again. I don't see it.
All right. Relaunch poll. There
we go.
How's that? Good. Okay.
Good.
All right. So I'm going to start with this very simple question, and I will share the answers. But again, since this is the topic of my talk today, I figured we should figure out where everyone is here. Maybe
it's all anonymous, just no
yeah, it's totally anonymous, I won't call out anybody in particular. And maybe the people who get enough sleep are napping right now, and not listening to my talk. So maybe we are missing them. And so I've had 84% of you have already participated. I'm going to give you like 5 seconds if you want to get your answer in, and then I'm going to shut it. There will be a couple more polls later if you didn't have a chance to answer. Oh, and we just hit 91%, so that's great. Most of you have gotten an answer in. If you want to get your answer in, last chance. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we got up to 92%. And here are the results. So this is actually, you all are doing much better than my college students, because nearly 60% of you say you do get enough sleep. I'm sorry, nearly 40% of you say you do get enough sleep. For my college students, it's like 10% or 5%. It's a very small amount. So you all are doing pretty well on this front. But I'll be ending today by talking about some strategies for getting more and better sleep. So if you're one of the 59% of people who reports not getting enough sleep, I'll end with giving you some practical information that you can use at the end. But before we talk about sleep specifically, I want to talk about how scientists think about sleep as one of the levels of consciousness. So when we think about consciousness in psychology, we think about it in part as being in a conscious alert state. That's when you're aware of yourself and your environment. So I'm hoping that everyone who's listening to me right now is in fact conscious, that you are hearing my words, you are hearing me talk, you are aware of this information. And that means that you are focused on your surrounding. It could be what you are seeing, it could be what you are hearing, it could be what you are eating, or smelling, etc. But so when we talk about consciousness, this is our regular alert state in which you are aware of yourself and your environment. Now, sleep falls into a little bit of a different category. Sleep falls into what we call an altered state of consciousness. And this is a kind of mental state that isn't the same as your direct consciousness like you're in right now. when we're sleeping, we're in something that psychologists call an altered state of consciousness, or an ASC. I know this is a little bit nerdy, but I wanted you to sort of think about how sleep is processed. Now, we're in this altered state of consciousness when we are sleeping, and I'll talk about what that means today. Also when we're dreaming, and I'm going to talk about what that means today. But there also are other times in which we enter a state of altered consciousness. So does anyone here meditate? Raise your virtual or non-virtual hand. And I'll just give you a second there. So if you meditate, what you are doing is entering an altered state of consciousness. And you can see the hands right there. Meditation is a way of reducing your conscious awareness of yourself and entering an altered state of consciousness. Certain kinds of drug use can also lead us to be in an altered state of consciousness. So can hypnosis under the guidance of a practitioner. So we can enter lots of different altered states of consciousness. But for today, I'm going to be focusing on sleep and on dreaming. Now, as Rita Rudner, comedian, says, I love to sleep. Do you? Isn't it great? It really is the best of both worlds. You get to be alive and also unconscious. Now, a psychologist wouldn't call it unconscious, but psychologists would definitely call it an altered state of consciousness in which you don't have a clear awareness because you are asleep. So in that case, it's really an altered mental state. Now, I want to turn, before we talk about sleep itself, to talk about a really important finding, which is that all animals, all dogs and cats and people and elephants and whatever, have what's called a circadian rhythm. And this is a consistent pattern of your body's cycle. So we all have, and this is about humans, have an internal biological clock that basically operates on a 24 or 25-hour cycle. So you might think it's a 24-hour cycle. It's not exactly a 24-hour cycle. It's a 24 or 25-hour cycle. But basically what this means is that your basic biological processes ebb and flow during the course of the day. And this describes lots of different parts of your body. So it describes your temperature. Your body's temperature ebbs and flows in a very consistent 24, 25-hour cycle. So do patterns of brain waves. So when we talk about circadian rhythm, what it really means is that we have this regular, consistent cycle that leads us to feel more alert during certain times and also more tired during different times. So for many people, there is a temperature rise in the early parts of the afternoon. And in many cultures, of course, what happens in the early part of the afternoon? You can unmute yourself. Unmute yourselves. Can you unmute yourself? In many cultures, the early part of the afternoon, what do? People have a nap. Maybe you can't.
Nap.
Or siesta, exactly. Siesta, really, yeah, a nap, a siesta. That's exactly right. So, and this is because that is a normal bodily cycle. When I have taught classes at Amherst in the afternoons, the like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, it's terrible because they are all nodding. They've just had a lunch and then they are really feeling drowsy. And that's all very, very normal. So these circadian rhythms actually lead you to feel more alert or less alert during different times of the day. Now, raise your hand, your virtual or your non-virtual hand, if you've ever experienced a terrible jet lag because you've traveled, to Europe or Asia or somewhere with a very, very different, or, California from the East Coast or vice versa. Who's ever experienced that? Look at all those hands that most of us have. And here's why. Jet lag is caused by your messing with your circadian rhythm. So all of a sudden you feel really alert and awake, but it's 3 a.m. Or all of a sudden you feel terribly tired and it's 3 p.m. That's an example of jet lag. Now, a more sort of subtle example happens when we change our clocks. When we fall back, spring forward, those are also examples in which we have some kind of a shift of our circadian rhythm. And it's one of the reasons why switching time zones actually kind of messes with people's biological clocks. So all of this evidence about circadian rhythm helps explain why we tend to feel more awake at certain times and more drowsy at other times. Now, I'm going to move on to talk about sleep, but before I do, I'm going to just kind of prime you to be thinking about a question that somebody might want to ask me in the Q&A. There was really interesting research, and this is very, very new, but that actually suggests that different people's circadian rhythms may influence whether you consider yourself a night owl or a sort of early bird. So certain people are like, I do my best work, really late at night, and that's when I'm really alert. And other people are like, definitely not. Other people are like, I'm a morning person. Like, I like getting up at 7 a.m. I can think really, clearly, and so on. So I'm not going to talk about that in the scope of this talk, but it would be a great thing for us to talk about in the Q&A. So if that interests you, just make a note of it. Put it in the chat room at the end, or unmute yourself and ask a question, because that's actually very interesting research that looks at individual differences in our circadian rhythms. Okay, so now let me get to the key part. What are the different stages of sleep? Now, when we think about sleep, we think, well, I'm asleep or I'm awake. But it's actually more complicated and more interesting than that. That when we sleep, we actually go through a series of stages. We start with stage 1, and stage 1 is really not like sleep. It's really a transition to stage 2. In stage 1, you are pretty much awake. You are starting the process of going to sleep, but you're still very, very alert. You're still very, very conscious of your surroundings. So in stage 1, there is this transition to starting to get drowsy and go into sleep, but it's really a transitional stage of just 2 or 3 minutes before you go into stage sleep, which is really more like being asleep. However, at stage 2, you're just barely asleep. And stage 2, you still have a pretty good conscious awareness of your surrounds. Raise your hand if you've ever been asleep, but all of a sudden have heard the phone ringing or a fire alarm or the sound of rain and started incorporating it into your dreams. That is stage 2. In stage 2, you can hear that alarm and you think, oh, there's a fire alarm, but it's really your alarm clock, for example. So in stage 2, you are aware if there is noise, if there is thunder, if there is rain, if there's an alarm clock. Those are all examples of stage 2. Now I'm going to ask you all to put your hands down because I'm going to ask then a question. I want everybody's hand down before I ask the question. All right, I think this is almost everybody has put their hands down. Great. Okay, here's my question. Have you ever had the sensation when you are falling asleep that you are falling and your body sort of jerks awake? Raise your hand if you've experienced that. Look at all of those hands. Look at that. And so this is already like 14, 15 people. And I know if you're participating in an iPad or something, you may not be able to raise your hand here, but look at all that. Like that is, most people are saying that experience. If you've had that experience, that's a stage 1 or stage 2 experience, because what you are having is your body is all of a sudden kind of letting go and then you jerk awake. And that's a sign that you are in the early stages, the stage 1 or stage 2 of sleep. All right, great examples. All right, you can put your hands down now. Now, stage 3 is the type of sleep stage in which people are really, really asleep. In stage 3, you don't hear your alarm. You sleep through your alarm. You sleep through noise. You are very hard to wake up and you are really, really fully asleep. In stage 3, your breathing is slow. It appears by all intents and purposes that you are in a deep, deep state of relaxation. In stage 1 and stage 2, you're still kind of tossing and turning and trying to get comfortable, etc. In stage 3, you are out like a light. It is hard to wake people up in stage 3. You really have to try very vigorously if you're trying to wake somebody up in stage 3, because stage 3 is a deep state of relaxation. And I'll show you in a minute how your brain looks in stage 3, for example, which is one of the most interesting findings. So when we talk about sleep, we talk about transitioning from this, the stage 1, just starting to get to sleep, then stage 2, a deeper, sort of more consistent stage of sleep, but then finally stage 3, which is when your body and your brain are really, really fully relaxed. But the thing that we're all most interested in is REM sleep, called rapid eye movement sleep. So psychologists call this rapid eye movement or REM sleep. And REM sleep is basically the kind of sleep that is associated most strongly with dreaming. So this is a stage of sleep, and it's called rapid eye movement sleep because if you are in REM sleep, even if your eyes are closed, so your eyelids are shut, your eyes are darting around behind your closed eyelids. So it's called rapid eye movement sleep because your eyes are moving around. You also are having lots of brain activity. In stage 3, your brain is quiet. Your brain is relaxed. In REM sleep, your brain is active, it's processing, it's firing, even though you are asleep. So rapid eye movement sleep is often called paradoxical sleep. And it's called paradoxical sleep because you're asleep, but your brain is very active and your eyes are moving around. You often have a rapidly beating heart. So you're asleep, but there's all of this activity going on in your brain and in your eyes and in your heart. So it's very, very active. And what the researchers think is that that's because in REM sleep, you are dreaming, that you are having lots of activity going along in your brain. Now, I'm going to turn to show you something that I just find fascinating. And this is how your brain looks when you are in these different stages. So I want you to look first at the first line. And the first line is, what does your brain look like in terms of your awake patterns? Now, what you can see is that in stage 1, your brain activity is slowing down a little bit. So the waves, so in our daily conscious alertness, the brain waves are pretty sharp because you're having lots of activity. In stage 1, you see the brain waves kind of slowing down. There's not so much going on as you start transitioning to sleep. In stage 2, you have something called sleep spindles. And those are those jagged kind of lines that basically are bursts of neural activity. Now, stage 3, we call these delta waves. And what you can see is that your brain is relaxed. The waves are slower, they're bigger, and there is a real state of relaxation. And finally, REM sleep. And as you can see here, REM looks a fair amount like you're awake and a fair amount like you're in stage 1. So during REM, you are really showing that your brain is acting like you are awake, that you're not in this deep stage of consciousness like you are in stage 3. I'm also just going to remind people that I will be glad to send you these slides if you'd like to have any of this to refer back to later on. So there's not going to be a test, but if anybody would like to refer back to this later on, I'm glad to send to send this to you. Or maybe Ashley will send it to you, even better. Maybe Ashley will
Yeah,
send it.
that would be great.
Super. Okay, great. Ashley will send it to you.
We'll send it in the recap after.
Super. Thank you, Ashley, as always. You guys are so awesome. All right. So one really important finding is how brain waves look, and that brain waves look really different during these different sleep stages. Another key finding is how your sleep changes through the course of the night. And this is one of the slides that I actually think is the most important. So what you can see here is a couple different things. And I'm sorry to get a little bit nerdy professor-like here. But what you can see is that during the first hours that you're asleep, you're spending a lot of time in deep sleep. Deep sleep is what we call really that stage 3 of sleep. So during the first few hours of the night, your first hour or two of sleep, you're spending a lot of time in deep sleep. There are long periods of time of deep sleep. And that really suggests that your body is really desperate or hungry for sleep. And so early in the night, you spend lots of time in this deep sleep and you don't spend so much time dreaming. But as you can see here, once you sleep for longer and longer amounts of time, 5 hours, 6 hours, even close to 7 hours, you're spending a huge amount of time dreaming. And this really suggests that when you are sleep deprived, you are really missing out on this important stage of dreaming. That when you are sleep deprived, if you're only sleeping 3 or 4 hours a night, you're not really getting the benefits of the dreaming. I'll talk a little bit later about what some of those benefits might be. And frankly, the jury is still out, but I'll tell you some leading theories about it. So what this finding says is that early in the night, you spend a lot of time in deep sleep. And after you've kind of gotten refreshed and you've been sleeping for 4 or 5 hours, you don't need the deep sleep anymore. You've done that. What you need is you get to spend more time dreaming. And that's what feels particularly good. All right. So I've talked about sleep stages through the night. And now you're probably wondering, well, why do we sleep? What does the science say? And what's so interesting is that there are a number of different theories, and all of these may have components that are absolutely right. So one theory of sleep is that sleep evolved in terms of evolution. And basically, when we're asleep, we don't move around. So we're not burning calories. So maybe we evolved as a way of sleeping for a period of time to help conserve our energy so that we have more calories to burn during regular waking time. Also, when you're sleeping, you're quiet. You're not moving and you're not drawing attention to yourself. So maybe it's a way in which evolutionarily we have some protection from predators because we're just asleep and we're hidden and we're quiet. And so we're less likely to be, frankly, attacked or eaten. I'm now going to show you a really interesting graph. And this is about how much time animals spend asleep based on their size. So what you can see here is very large animals, cows and goats and sheep and horses. They don't sleep very many hours, 3 or 4 hours. Very, very small animals that are potentially at greater risk of predators attacking or eating them tend to sleep much longer. And so that suggests that maybe one of the reasons why different animals sleep for different amounts of time is really how much protection they need from predators. If you're bigger, there are not that many things that can hurt you. So it's okay to be awake and alert for longer periods of time. If you're very little, you in fact may need to sleep much more. So this is one theory that's called the evolutionary theory. Now, another theory is called restorative theory. And what this theory says is that sleep allows your body to basically repair itself and to recuperate from depleting daily waking activities. So when you're asleep, your body tissues can heal. Your body is at rest. When you're asleep also, you may in fact be able to kind of have a break. Really interesting research has shown that if you've experienced something very, very stressful, you often spend more time in sleep immediately after, kind of suggesting that sleep is your body's way of recovering from difficult experiences. So this is called restorative theory. And then finally, the third theory is called consolidation theory. And consolidation theory is really about the brain. So restorative theory is really about kind of the whole body, like your muscle tissues and so on. Consolidation theory says sleep is really important for learning, and it helps you consolidate, store, and maintain memories. So basically, during sleep, our body can kind of put together and our brain can think about, well, what did we learn today? And how do I store that in the brain and make connections between different kinds of neurons? Here is a really interesting chart that looks at how much time we sleep and how much time we spend in REM sleep. Remember, REM sleep is the dreaming sleep across the lifespan. And what you can see here is that little tiny babies, babies who are, a week, a month, a few months old, they spend a gigantic amount of time in REM sleep. Very, very little babies spend about 50% of their sleep in REM, and they sleep for about 16, 17 hours a day. As you get older, you need less sleep, and you also spend less time dreaming, less time in REM sleep. And this makes sense at a neurological level. If you're a brand new baby, every single day you are learning a ton of things because the whole world is new. So you need to spend lots of time sleeping to consolidate all of these new words you learned and sounds you heard and people you met and sensations. When you're older, you're not learning as much new stuff every single day. So maybe you just don't need to spend quite as much time asleep learning and consolidating and maintaining different kinds of memories. So I've talked about 3 different theories about sleep. I talked about the evolution theory. I talked about restorative theory. I talked about consolidation theory. And here's the reality. All of those may be right. It doesn't mean that you have to pick one theory as the right one. But researchers really debate which of these is the most important. But again, it's possible that all 3 of these are actually important. Now, what we absolutely do know is that there are major consequences of sleep deprivation. And there is lots of very compelling research showing that regardless of which of those theories you find most compelling, not getting enough sleep is really, really bad. And I want to talk about a little bit of this evidence. Research has shown that people who are sleep deprived are more likely to have accidents. This could be accidents in terms of car crashes, in terms of plane crashes, in terms of, stumbling in your house. I mean, all different kinds of things. Here is a tragic example of a terrible plane crash. And the last sounds recorded on the black box were rest. That's what I need is rest. And these were the final words on the black box recorder uttered by an airline captain right before he crashed his plane at a low altitude, and he died, and so did everybody else on the plane. This was a plane crash that happened in the 1970s, and it was one of the examples of something that led to major changes in the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, requiring pilots to have a certain amount of rest between flights. Similar research has shown that doctors who are on call for more than 24 hours are much more likely to make medical errors that, of course, can have lasting consequences. And that research has led to changes in terms of rules about how long doctors can work continuously. Because again, what's clear is that our thinking becomes foggier and we make mistakes when we are sleep deprived. Research has also shown that athletes who are jet lagged don't play as well. Again, suggesting that there are consequences in terms of sports, even for high-level teams. Those who travel east and travel west, and again, become jet lagged, don't play as well as those who are on a consistent, regular circadian cycle, as I talked about before. Research has shown that students who are sleep deprived have trouble remembering information. They don't do as well on exams. So these are all examples of the consequences of sleep deprivation for performance. Other research has shown in a fascinating way that judges who are sleep deprived make more errors in their rulings. In fact, they've shown that judges who are making decisions shortly after lunch, when they may be, again, kind of tired, as we talked about later, are more likely to make errors in their legal judgments. And that's also true even if you look at judges who are sleep deprived because the clocks have just changed. And again, they're not as alert as they would be, and they're drowsy at work. So this can have real and substantial consequences. People have shown that we are more likely to fight with our loved ones, that relationship conflict is more likely when you are feeling tired. We've all probably had the experience of being, irritable because we are sleep deprived. So we snap at our friend or our child or our colleague, again, because we are sleep deprived. And finally, sleep deprivation is actually bad for your health. I know I've talked about the mind body with you all earlier this year, but fascinating research has shown that people who do not get enough sleep are more likely to develop a cold. What they did in this study was they asked people to rate how much sleep have you had on average over the last 2 weeks. And then, with the people's permission, they inserted a cold virus into their nostril. And then they just looked to see who developed a cold over the next couple of weeks. And as you can see on this chart, people who got more than 7 hours of sleep a night were very unlikely to develop a cold, only around 17, 18% of them, even when the cold virus had been directly inserted into their bodies. But people who slept fewer than 5 or 6 hours a night were much more likely to develop a cold. Nearly 50% of those people developed a cold. So not having enough sleep, it's bad for your immune system. Again, leaving your body much more susceptible to developing a cold. Now, we're going to go to our second poll question. And this is a poll question for you all to answer, again, anonymously, about your own levels of sleep deprivation. So I'm going to give you a quiz, and this is a number of different items on the quiz. What I want you to do is just make a note. You could make a note on a piece of paper or on your fingers, but I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and each time that you say true, you give yourself 1 point. And sum up the points, because then I'm going to ask you to report how many points you have in just a minute. This is a standard measure of, are you sleep deprived? Do you need an alarm in order to wake up? If that's true for you, give yourself a point. Is it usually a struggle to get out of bed? If that's true for you, give yourself a point. Do you hit the snooze button several times? Do you feel tired, irritable, and stressed out during the week? Do you have trouble concentrating and remembering? Does your critical thinking, problem solving, and creativity seem slowed? Do you often fall asleep watching TV? Do you often fall asleep after dinner? Do you usually fall asleep within a couple of minutes of getting into bed? And I'm just going to pause for a minute. This number 9 is a clear example of sleep deprivation, because basically what it's meaning is as soon as you get to sleep, remember I talked before about how you go from stage 1 for a few minutes and then stage 2 for about 20 minutes and then drop to stage 3, the deeper stage of sleep. If you're sleep deprived, you basically go, you hit the pillow and you're like right into deep sleep because your body is just so desperate for it. 10, do you feel drowsy while driving? 11, do you often sleep in on weekends? 12, do you need a nap to get through most days? 13, do you have dark circles under your eyes? And finally, 14, have you ever had an accident or near accident at work or while driving? All right, so I want you to add up your points right now. So some of you might have 0 points. That would be very low sleep deprivation, no sleep deprivation. Some of you might have as many as 14 if you answered yes to all of these 14 items. So I want you to tally up your scores. Again, you should have a number between 0 and 14. And I'm now going to give you your second poll. And there it is. So the way that Zoom works, you can't actually have 14 choices. So if you have 5 or below, you're going to do that one and then scroll down because then you can go all the way. So 5 or below is the lowest answers. And I'm just going to combine all those. And then 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, you can go all the way those up to 14. And I'll just give you like 15 seconds. You guys are doing a great job. Already 60% of you have participated. And again, remember to scroll down if you need some of the higher numbers. You don't need to scroll down if you are not sleep deprived. And we've just hit 70% participation on the poll, which is great. And again, this is totally anonymous. I will share the responses so you can all kind of see where you all fall out. And in the interest of time, because I want to make sure we're doing lots of time for Q&A, I'm going to give you like 5 more seconds to put in your answer. So if you want to get in your answer, this is your last chance. So I'm going to go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we hit 74%. Oh, we just hit 70. Oh, sorry, we just hit 76%. I guess some people were getting it in right there at the end. Okay, I'm going to close the poll now, and I'm going to share the results. So 63% of you are really not sleep deprived. So 63% of you said 5 or below, and some of those people might even have been at 0 or 1. But then you can see that people really do vary a lot, that some people were at 9, 10, 11, even 12. And so certainly there is a range in terms of sleep deprivation that people are experiencing. Okay. And don't worry, as I promised at the beginning, at the end, I'm going to give you some strategies for those of you who are in the somewhat sleep deprived stage. All right, I want to talk very briefly about common sleep disorders. I think many of these will be familiar to you. I'm glad to take more questions on these later on. So insomnia is the #1 most common sleep disorder that people have. And this is, again, the persistent problem that you have either falling asleep to begin with. So some people who have insomnia have trouble initially getting to sleep. Other people get to sleep, but then they wake up and they can't get back to sleep. And so insomnia is a very, very persistent problem. Some people have sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is a disorder in which you actually stop breathing while you are asleep. This is somewhat more common in men than in women. And people who have sleep apnea may not be aware of it. Often they find they are aware of it because they snore. And if they're sleeping with somebody else in the room, that person may say, hey, wake up, you're snoring. And it may drive, their partner up the wall. But sleep apnea is basically a disorder in which people fall asleep, then stop breathing, and then their body actually jerks awake because they're deprived briefly of oxygen. Narcolepsy is relatively unusual, but this is a sudden and irresistible compulsion to sleep. So people who have narcolepsy, again, which is a psychological disorder, this is a disorder of sleep, will all of a sudden fall asleep. And that could be, again, while they're driving or, mowing the lawn or, flying a plane or, something. So it can have really serious consequences. And then nightmares and sleep terrors are not really about sleep. I mean, they're sleep disorders, but they're really sleep disorders that are about dreams. That people who have nightmares have terribly, terribly anxiety-provoking dreams that they may jerk awake because of this bad dream. Again, a nightmare. And sleep terrors we often associate with children. So some of you may have had children who've experienced sleep terrors or have grandchildren. And this is when a child awakes from sleep and they are terrified. So their heart is beating fast. They are panicked in that sense. And so these sleep terrors are even more extreme than nightmares. And again, they can be pretty common in children. Children who have sleep terrors may not be aware of having those when they are awake, but they happen pretty regularly during the night. All right. Last key thing that I really want to talk about before I give you the strategies and we turn to Q&A is theories about why we dream. And it's really challenging to come up with theories about why we dream, because the reality is people who are dreaming, can't tell you it. And it's harder to study because you can't, ask people because we're not aware of it. But here are the sort of leading theories about why we dream. The original theory in psychology was wish fulfillment. And this was a theory that was developed by Sigmund Freud. So it's a historical theory. And basically what his theory said is that dreams allow us to play through or imagine something that is unacceptable. So it's kind of like an outlet. It's a safe outlet. So maybe you dream about, killing somebody and you can't actually kill them in your daily life, but you can dream about killing them or dream about them dying, in that way. Freud's theory distinguished between what we call the manifest content, and the manifest content means what is the storyline of your dream. So I'm going to give a little bit of a risque example here because it's Freud. But so Freud would say, if you dream about dancing, so you're dreaming about dancing, that's the sort of manifest content of the storyline. Again, it's Freud. The latent content, which basically means what is the hidden message in that manifest content. So as you can probably imagine, again, it's Freud. Dancing would be a sort of socially acceptable way of thinking about having sex. And that really, because it's a Freud, those are sort of things linked up. So he would say you have a manifest content, your storyline, but they're sort of our stand-ins. So dancing is really your socially acceptable way of thinking about sex in that sense. And that's just one example. Now, there's not a lot of evidence for Freud's theory. Doesn't mean it's not true, but it's really hard to test what is latent content, because again, if it's submerged in the unconscious, you don't know. So other research has said dreaming might be really about what we call activation synthesis. And basically what dreams are doing is trying to create a pattern about all the different kinds of random stimulation of your neurons that happens while you dream. So maybe dreams are your way of just kind of trying to make sense of what's going on as neurons are firing in the brain during sleep. And I talked before about how babies spend a lot of time dreaming, and maybe it's that during sleep and dreaming, your brain is firing. It's active. It's kind of giving your mind a little bit of energy and activation. And maybe we try to impose some kind of coherent pattern to make sense of it. And that's the theory of activation synthesis. Basically, it's just random neurons firing, but you try to come up with a storyline to make sense of it if you happen to wake up during your dreams. But probably the leading theory is called cognitive. And cognitive, and again, all of them may be correct, but the cognitive theory really says is that dreams help us process what has happened during our daily lives. Who remembers, I'm just going to ask for another show of hands here, who remembers having a dream about something that was very much something that you were worried about in your day-to-day waking life? Like you're a college student taking an exam and you have a dream about taking an exam or something like that. That's pretty common. And the idea here is that dreams might be, I see a number of people have had that experience. Dreams might be a way in which you are kind of processing things that you are thinking about in your daily life. As the author John Steinbeck said, it is a common experience that a problem difficult at night is resolved in the morning after the committee of sleep has worked on it. And in fact, really interesting research has shown that after people have been through something really difficult, this is an example of a bridge collapsing after a very big earthquake. This is from the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake that happened in California. You might remember that one. It interrupted the World Series. And what they did was they showed that people who lived in California, particularly in the Bay Area, reported lots and lots of dreaming about earthquakes in the weeks after that earthquake. People in Arizona who had not experienced, directly this earthquake didn't report that kind of a dream. So this really suggests that dreams might be a way in which we process and kind of think about what's happened during our daily waking life. All right, in my last few minutes, I want to talk very briefly about strategies for better sleep, and then I'm looking forward to the Q&A. So again, be thinking about your questions. So I'm giving you 6 strategies that the research really shows are important in terms of helping us get better sleep. 1, stick to a schedule. Many people have this theory, like my college students, that you can be sleep deprived during the week and then you catch up on the weekends. And in fact, it's much easier to sleep if you have a regular schedule of going to sleep and waking up, and that your schedule is, I wake up at about the same time and I go to sleep at about the same time. It's actually much harder for your circadian rhythms if you have this big swing of going to sleep later and then earlier and then later and then earlier and so on. So sticking to a regular sleep schedule really helps your circadian rhythms get established and have your body get into this habit of, okay, this is when now, it's time for me to go to sleep. So 1, stick to a schedule. 2, think about your sleeping space. We all tend to sleep the best under certain conditions. Quiet, that kind of makes sense. So if you're in a noisy environment, having a sound machine or a fan or something else that will help block noise is helpful. Dark makes sense. Again, this could be room darkening shades. It could be sleeping with a blindfold on, or a face mask, etc. Also cool. People sleep better under cool temperatures. And so quiet, dark, and cool are basically the best strategies in terms of getting good sleep. 3, watch what and when you eat and drink. Having a lot of liquid before you go to sleep can make you feel like you need to get up and pee. Having a too heavy meal can lead your stomach to be kind of gurgling. So not having too much to eat or drink right before, in the couple of hours before you go to sleep, is good. It's also, though, important not to be hungry. So not eating for hours before you go to sleep can actually lead you to feel hungry. So either eating, 2 or 3 hours before you want to go to sleep, or having a small light snack, some milk or a banana or something in the hour or so before you go to sleep can be really useful. 4, exercise. And I know I have talked about happiness and mindset with you all before, and exercise, of course, is a really important part of happiness and health. It's also important that you don't exercise right before you go to bed. If you exercise right before you go to bed, it actually elevates your heart rate, your blood pressure, and so on. And so exercising helps your body feel tired at the end of the night. But exercising right before you go to bed actually is counterintuitive, that when you're heading to bed, you should be thinking about being quieter and less active. And so exercising is good, but not in the hours right before you want to go to bed. Exercise earlier in the day. 5, limit naps. And so one of the challenges here is people say, well, I'm so tired, I had to take a nap. But once you've taken a nap, it actually can make it harder for you to fall asleep at night. And this is why, many parents of young kids are like, no, I don't want my kid to nap right now because I want them to sleep through the night. And it's the same thing with people. And so if you find yourself having trouble going to sleep at night and you know that you nap, try to cut out the nap or shorten the time. So it's only, 20 minutes or so. Because if you nap too much during the day, you actually may not have such a need to sleep at night so early, and that can make it harder to fall asleep. And finally, manage worries. And this is my one that I'm really super bad at. For many people, you want to go to sleep, you're tired, but as soon as you lie down, you start thinking about the worries and the problems and things on your mind and your to-do list. And that is really not a good strategy for getting to sleep. So if you know that you have this tendency, it's really important to find healthy strategies of trying to let your worries go before you try to get in bed. As Dale Carnegie said, if you can't sleep, then get up and do something instead of lying there worrying. It's the worry that gets you, not the lack of sleep. And this is a really important one for lots of women in particular who tend to do something called ruminating, in which you are kind of obsessing about problems you are facing. So if you know that this is true for yourself, try to find ways of managing your worries and don't go to sleep thinking about them. Go to sleep thinking about happy things, about positive things, about things you're grateful for. Write in a gratitude journal right before you go to sleep. Read a compelling novel, etc. Maybe don't turn on the news or read the news on your phone, which is not so encouraging these days. And so trying to let your mind be calm is also a really important strategy. And my final poll question, and for this last poll question, I've talked about 6 different strategies, and you can now answer this third poll, and you can answer more than one. So the other polls, you only got one choice. For this one, you can actually answer one of them, or you can answer all of them, whichever you want. So again, I'll just give you about 10 seconds, and then I will share your answers. I've tried to give you a range of different things, hoping that some of these will fit with each of you. And then we will turn it over to Q&A, which is always my favorite time. So be thinking about things that you wanted to ask or wanted to share with other people. And we've just hit 50% of you participating in the poll, which is great. Again, this is totally anonymous. Oh, we just hit 60%. All right, and we've now just hit 70%, so that's great. If you want to get your answers in, and I will say that already people have selected all of them, so that's always good. I always try to give 6 strategies because different things work for different people. Some people might say, oh yeah, I'm kind of worried. Some other people might say, oh yeah, I should think about my sleeping space. And so again, I just try to give different kinds of strategies so that I'm reaching each of you in some way, I hope. And we've just now had 80% of you participate, which is super. So I'm going to count down in the interest of time for 5 seconds, and then I'm going to shut the poll. So if you want to get your answer in, here's your chance. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we hit 83% of you participating. So that's great. And I'm going to share the results. So what you can see here is that the number one thing, maybe there are a lot of women here, was manage worries. And that was 68% of you. And that tends to be something that's more of an issue for women than for men. But 57% of you thought the strategy of thinking about what you eat and drink was important. And 55% of you thought about sticking to a schedule. So those were the 3 most common. And I'm going to stop sharing now. And I'm just going to give you my final slide. I have a chapter in this book. It's chapter 8, in which I talk about behaviors, including sleep. So for people who want to learn more about it, chapter 8 is the chapter, again, in this book. Ashley is going to send you a little summary of this talk and is going to send you, I'm going to send Ashley my slides. So you're going to get a copy of the slides automatically. And I'm going to now stop sharing my screen.